Hello, everybody. Welcome to Tabletop Voices. I am James Introcaso. I go by he, him. Today, we are talking with a game designer who I have been excited to talk to since months ago when I first reached out to her to talk about being on this show. Emily, do you want to introduce yourself and let the people know what you've created in the world of tabletop role-playing games?
Hi, my name's Emily Caraboss. I use the pronouns she and her. And let's see, I have written something called the Romance Trilogy, which is 3 games, Breaking the Ice, Shooting the Moon, and Under My Skin, that I wrote over a series of many years. And I put them together as a trilogy. They'd always been intended to be a trilogy, and they sort of have thematic resonance with one another. They're each romance-oriented games. And then after a decade of running them and putting them out there, I decided to put them together all in one book. And now it feels like they always were that way. And the games themselves are really brief. I put them out, and some of my first work went into them. But I decided when I wanted to put the volume together, there's a lot of people who had already played them, maybe purchased them in a couple of different ways. And so I wanted to add a lot of extra for people. So each of the games has a suite of different skins and parts of the game that you can hack and use in different ways. There's romance games, so there's ways to play them that aren't oriented towards romance, because not everybody wants to do that every time. And it ended up, a funny thing about the games is the first one, Breaking the Ice, is a 2-player game. And then the next one is 2 or 3 players, and the other one's 4 and up to 8 players. And I wrote a whole bunch of hacks, and it ended up that you can play games in this volume that go from 1 person, there's a 1-person version, all the way up to 10 people. So wow. It's, it doesn't matter how many people you got, you can find something to play.
That's excellent. Yeah, you've done a lot of work in the tabletop role-playing game space, which is incredible. And I want to talk all about it and the awesome games you've worked on, but take me all the way back. When did you first play a tabletop role-playing game?
I first started playing tabletop role-playing games in college, which for some people of my generation is a little late. A lot of us got in high school, maybe we played with friends after school. I owned D&D, Redbox in the 80s, and I read it and I pawed over it and I thought about characters, but I didn't get to play. We had one game where we got together and then we spent the whole time trying to figure out what kind of pizza to have. So we never actually played. But then when I got into college, I fell into a community with some folks who really loved role-playing. There was a group of people that I lived with, and they had this shared build, and they'd been working on it for a long time. And they had, of course, since this was the 90s now, they'd homebrewed the system. So it was Ars Magica or Magica plus GURPS and all of their weird and wacky stuff that they thought up. And it was fabulous. I felt like, I don't know, there's all this work that J.R.R. Tolkien put into creating a world and languages and created this real depth of world that is one of the things that makes Tolkien, despite critiques and different, still speak to us over a long period of time. It's got this world that you can enter into. And I felt like I had entered into it with these friends who had been able to make this place to be in and these characters to experience the world through. And it was mind-blowing, and it felt home, and it just felt like one of the best ways to experience a story, because instead of watching it happen, I've been a reader my whole life since I was a kid. I could be part of it and author it at the same time, and then do that with friends. It was like magic.
That's so fun. That's awesome. And you totally encapsulate the way I feel about role playing games, too. It is really entering this world with friends, creating and telling an awesome story. So, at what point did you make the leap from being a player to doing this professionally? How did that go down?
Let's see, it's just a little bit of a technical lag. Did you say how is it created digitally, or can you repeat the
Oh,
question? I'm sorry.
yes, no problem. How did you make the leap from player to professional?
Oh, right, of course. How did I go from just playing and loving it to getting to be paid or creating things that I could share with other people?
Mhm.
Um, in the 2000s and the 90s, there were a couple of different communities I was involved with or heard about that were online, where people talked about how you make games and how you play them better. There was a Usenet group called Rec Games Fantasy Advocacy. I always get that mixed up. I think that's the order it goes in. It's been so long. Um, and some friends of mine, the ones I was playing with, were engaged in really interesting, in-depth conversations about it. And a little later on in the early 2000s, there was a site called The Forge. And that took on some of the conversations that had happened on advocacy and then pushed it in a direction towards publishing. And that was the time period where PayPal became something that people could use and take advantage of. PDFs were a way that you could easily create digital versions of things. It was much easier to create your own online store, and social media was becoming something that was powerful. People blogged and people listened to them. So you had an access to direct marketing that was unlike anything we had access to before. Also, there were a lot of different ways where you could do small print runs. You could create something and share it either digitally eventually or in hard copy and not break the bank. You didn't have to make 10,000 copies of your first game in order to get it out there in a way that looked professional, that was aesthetic, that would be cool. And so that's some of the things that this community really helped each other learn about, as well as, like, struggling with what is a role-playing game? What can a role-playing game be? And I enjoyed the conversation and engaged in it, and joined a contest where people were writing games, and so I wrote one, and I was like, oh, wait a minute, I can write games. And from there, in 2005, I published my first game, which was Breaking the Ice. And it was really simple, just half page size, saddle stitched, but with a cover that was lovely, that a good friend of mine who is a talented illustrator did. And from there, I started just in a small way, not with a huge overhead, but going to conventions like Gen Con, which again was made possible because I was part of this community, and we put our pennies together and we shared a booth. And there were people out there interested in these different kinds of games that were just a different view of what it could be, different voices, and so that's how I started. And for me, game publishing is for me, it's an artistic venue primarily. It's never been something I've intended to make my living on. I am a forester in my daily life. I do conservation work in Western Massachusetts. So that's pretty different from role playing. But it certainly means that I'm able to make a living doing something that I believe in, and then also games are the art that I love to delve into and learn about, and I can take chances and try new things. And it's a business that I have. That's one part of how I make my living.
Wow. That is really awesome that you have this career as a forester and you're also a game designer. I think a lot of game designers have a second career because tabletop game design doesn't tend to pay all of the bills, as it were. Um, but I'm wondering if you could tell me a little bit about Breaking the Ice, the first game you made. What is it about and how does it play?
Sure. It's a romance game.
Mhm.
It's about two characters going on their first three dates or three encounters, and seeing if what they have, this attraction that they have for one another, is strong enough to go the distance. And I wrote it. I wanted it to be a very concise game. It was my first game that I thought I might publish. And I was prompted to write it because of conversations or arguments on the internet about whether people could or should play people who weren't like them. If a man could play a woman or people could play someone of a different gender than them. And I had had the experience of people playing a wide variety of characters that had totally different attributes. And that's what the joy of it is for me, is looking at the world from different eyes. Um, and the game was written to invite people into that in a respectful way. There's part of the rules where when you're making the characters, you have to chat, a little bit about who you are, and you find some way that you as players differ. It's just two players, two characters. It's intimate. There's no big audience. It's just you, and then you give that attribute to the other player to play, so the character has something of you in them. And then they're fictional characters. You're not trying to be that other person, but each of you help the other person learn a little bit about what it's like to be this other person. When I went to conventions and ran it for people, it was a little funny because it's literally breaking the ice. You have to say, okay, so who are you? Hi. um, and at that time, a lot of the people who were playing were kind of similar. They'd say, okay, so how are we the same and how are we different? Oh, so we're both a couple of guys and probably white, and so how do we differ? Oh, that's right, we both work in computer fields. There was a lot of peeling away the layers. And I bet now those conversations might be really different. But it was interesting seeing how people would connect with one another, find similarities and differences, and have to actually just deal with each other as people, and then make characters, and then see if they fell in love or not. And because it was dealing with romance in the mid 2000s, that was pretty unusual as a topic for a tabletop role playing game, at least. So I did get pushback and skepticism about whether that's an appropriate thing to do, or whether people felt like they could do that with another player,
Sure.
whether that would feel safe. And there's a lot of, horror stories about involving romance. So people often just set it aside, and
Sure.
everyone has to absolutely do what they feel comfortable with. So that's why I wrote the game to be a collaborative game. You're working together with a common goal. The way it works is that you award people dice for what they've said, so they feel supported. And also it gives you an opportunity to say, well, okay, maybe we can change it a little bit. That doesn't quite work for me, so that you're creating the story together. And it's a short game. You're playing it for a few hours. You're not dedicating your life to it. So if it's not for you, it's not going to go on forever. But also it gives you this opportunity to be a little bit vulnerable for just a little bit of time with one other person. That's kind of special.
Yeah, I think that's really great. And I think, you know, since that time, romance games have become something that is more popular. I think you're seeing more people becoming comfortable with the idea, especially because of the collaborative tools that are included in the game, the mechanics that you've created. You then went and tripled down, right? You created a trilogy using that. What are the other two games in your trilogy like? That's Under My Skin, right? And Shooting the Moon?
That's right. For some reason I went for phrases with these titles. So Shooting the Moon is it's meant to be for 2 or 3 players. And part of the reason I wrote it was actually because when I was running and people were playing Breaking the Ice, it seemed easy if you had an even number of people to just have people play in pairs. I later learned you can also just play in groups and people can give suggestions and all that kind of thing. But I didn't know that at the time. So I thought, oh, well, maybe if I write another game that's for 3 people, then I could publish them together and people could have a choice. Hey. And so I sat down to write Shooting the Moon, which is, I guess, the next sort of natural situation that came to mind for romantic situations is a love triangle. So there's a beloved who is a person who's esteemed and interesting and of power and admiration in whatever setting you choose. And then there's 2 other people in the setting who are working to be able to gain that person's affections in some way. And the simple thing of moving from 2 to 3 players was so different. It's so interesting when you change one little thing, the dynamics are totally different. The way the game works in many ways is similar. You're rolling 6-sided dice. You're trying to get successes on 5s or 6s. But in this game, you can actually add traits to the other characters. So you're co-authoring the characters as well. Cool. In the first game, you can add traits as you go along to your own character. And because there's a competitive element to Shooting the Moon, it means that sometimes people give you traits you would not have chosen, like weaknesses or things that are hard to deal with. And obviously the players are okay with it, but it's opening up doors that you might not have opened otherwise. So that's actually one of my favorite things about the game, is that it gives you all these surprises and takes you down different story lanes that you might have chosen for yourself. And I wrote it for 2 or 3 players. So, okay, another challenge, have the same game be good for 2 different numbers of players in a way that's, I don't know, it's like having a game be with a GM or not with a GM whenever you feel like it. So, and actually all the games, the first 2 games are not intended to have a game master or someone who's facilitating. It's completely even. You do the same things in Breaking the Ice. And then in Shooting the Moon, no one is creating the world. You're creating the world together. You're saying what side characters do all together. But you have different types of roles. The person who's playing the beloved, it's just a different situation than if you're playing the suitors. And then Under My Skin, I kept going because I was like, oh, okay, so what if you have 4 more players? And that one, it's a little bit out of personal experience, and also it just was the next story, I guess, that occurred to me to write about. And it's about a group of friends, some of whom are in relationships with other people, long-term relationships, who at a certain point start having feelings for other people in that social circle. Cool. So that is just a really deep dive into difficult, complicated emotions and relationships. And this one I published in 2009, so it's almost been a decade that this has been out. And it really was not something that was on people's radar in terms of tabletop role-play games, certainly. And it took me a long time to figure out how to write this game. As a tabletop game, I had ideas about types of mechanics, but it didn't gel until I was able to travel and get to play some live action games with folks in Europe who were writing something called Jeepform. And it was a particular group of folks who had ideas about like playing hard-hitting, emotional, but not fantastic games set in our own social reality, dealing with the issues that anyone might deal with on a day-to-day level, but making them heartfelt and interesting. And it totally resonated for me. That's something that meant a lot to me. The psychology of characters and feelings and emotions and you feeling them as a player were what I was hoping for. And so after I played the game, I joked with a friend, oh, maybe I should make it a Jeepform. And they said, yeah. Or actually, now I can't remember whether they joked or I joked, but at any rate, they were right. Whoever it was who said it was right. And I looked at it from that lens, and the game absolutely fell together. Like, a couple of days later, I knew how it should work, and I'd been working on it for years. So it's really a lesson to me that playing and learning and listening to others and being exposed to new ways to do things can help you turn the key on puzzles that you're working with creatively.
Wow. That's awesome. Puzzles, I think, are really hard to do in role playing games, as well as mysteries can be very difficult to do as well. You have a big body of work that we could go through here, but one big thing that I do want to talk to you about, because I love it so much, is the game Bubble Gumshoe, which is about solving mysteries, but also relationships in a big way as well. So Bubble Gumshoe uses the Gumshoe system, which is a mystery solving system that a lot of different things have used, right? Trail of Cthulhu, and I think Mutant City Blues, Night's Black Agents, all that sort of thing. And then Bubble Gumshoe is the teen detective version, right? It's the Scooby-Doo squad without so much supernatural weirdness as there is in Scooby-Doo. I was surprised when I sat down to play this. I had a ton of fun, and I had, we made all the typical high school jokes and that sort of thing, but it's also a very serious game. It can get very heavy as you remember these times. When you were talking about Under My Skin and social dynamics and that sort of thing, it made me think of what can happen in a Bubble Gumshoe game, because you've got those same close group of friends. Maybe they have some feelings towards each other, maybe they don't. That can come up in that game even. So I'm hoping you can talk to me a little bit about Bubble Gumshoe, what you love about it, and how the relationships and mystery solving work in that game.
Excellent. Yeah, Bubble Gumshoe is the biggest game I've worked on that's not my own. One of the things I've always done is publish independently. So it was a really interesting experience to delve into freelance. And I've done smaller jobs, but this is so different when you actually are one of the core designers for a game. Working with Ken Hite and Lisa Steele was really wonderful. Evil Hat, Sean Nittner managed that project and kept us all in line. And it took a long time, but I think it needed to take a while for us to really make sure we came to grips with the material and were respectful in representation for the characters that we wanted out there as the model. Because obviously people can make their own characters, but it was pulling on something that has a large body of work. Nancy Drew, the Hardy Boys, Veronica Mars is a more recent example. There's a lot of wonderful teen detectives out there. And of course, Scooby-Doo,
right.
who I loved growing up. Absolutely. I mean, there's this wonderful thing about Scooby-Doo where they're skeptics. They're debunking things. Yeah, go for it. Science. And we did end up writing, there's a bunch of hacks and skins and stuff in Bubble Gumshoe too, and there's one that's oriented towards spooky stuff and superheroes and all that kind of thing. But the core game is looking at mysteries in high school, which brings in some lightness because it is for a younger group, and it also brings in some seriousness, particularly now because the world is not a light place for people who are young. Just because you're young doesn't mean you're sheltered. There's a tremendous amount of things that come into your life then that you're vulnerable to. Bullying is a huge issue now, especially sort of magnified by social media. And then also being a younger person, you don't quite have the full scope of tools that you might if you're an adult detective out there with guns and things. So that was one of the things that we sort of settled early on was, okay, yeah, sure, there might be fighting, there might be violence in this game, but if that happens, it's not something we're looking for the main characters to be initiating. And we want to just let the GM, excuse me, and the players know the way we would handle that is, okay, what would happen? All right, if you used a weapon on somebody or you beat them up, then there would be legal repercussions or repercussions in terms of being able to go to school. So we wanted to leave that outside of the purview of what the stories would be about, but leave it there as something that sort of reflects reality. So the rules don't focus on it. The rules are much more oriented towards social interactions, which when you think about a great deal of all mysteries, a lot of it is social negotiations. Are you going to be able to have a conversation that's going to help make someone trust you so that they'll tell you what you need? And of course, the characters do have many skills because they're kind of superheroes, even though they're teenagers, but they're in a role-playing game, so you get to do lots of stuff. And so we tied a lot of that to their experience and also the other people in their world that they can call on. Maybe they're in a club, they're in the AV club, so they can have their friends come in and help them videotape something to get some evidence. Or their parent is a doctor, and so that helps them be able to have some kind of forensic know-how. It brings to mind Veronica Mars, her father's detective. And so she brings this skill set because of that perspective. And your friends and cohorts, they're resources for you. You can call on them to come and help you. And if things are going bad, you can kind of like have some backup from them. And the way we worked the relationships between the main characters is that that's not governed by the mechanics. We're not saying, okay, I am mad at you, Trixie, or I've got a crush on you, George. We let the players just figure that out, and that's free form. So if that develops, if that happens, that's fine. And then with the non-player characters, you could have hates and loves and likes. So we're saying, okay, you're a person who is in this very complicated social field where you have connections to other people, and those connections are something that you can draw on to help you. And mysteries, doing a good mystery, I think that's a huge challenge. There's so many different approaches that have been made. Gumshoe is a really excellent addition to that. And it just says, all right, guys, nobody wants to just sit around looking for clues. We want to get the clues so we can get to the mystery and engage with people and figure it out and then deal with it. So it was a really nice spine to be able to put this on. And Lisa Steele, who she wrote GURPS Mysteries, it was awesome having her be able to give a tremendous amount of really good tips and give people a structure to look at what the spine is and figure out how you're going to connect your clues. So I felt really happy to be able to lean on her for that. Because a lot of the games that I write, they're not mystery oriented. I'm actually working on a ghost story mystery game right now. That's sort of fanfic oriented. It's something where someone's a ghost and someone's alive, but they're in love, but they can't be together. And
I love it.
Stay tuned. And for that, I'm also thinking about how do you create this mystery? And in Bubblegum Shoe, it's lovely the way it's set out there, where you can just have these clues. You create different encounters that might happen at different times. You have characters who have meaningful difficulties that they're dealing with that impel them into having something that they do that's not cool. Writing the game, it ended up being quite a serious game in a lot of ways. But that's because the world is serious, and we were writing it to reflect our world and more of the world, not just a narrow, whitened version of it. I hope you enjoy it, and I hope other people do too.
Oh, for sure. I love it. And I think it's one of those things that people, when they look back on high school, we look back sometimes and it's like, oh, high school, that was silly, that didn't matter or whatever. But you really are. It is an emotional time in your life as a teenager. You're discovering sort of a new level of love and interaction and social constructs and that sort of thing. And when you really think back to how you felt back then, that is how Bubble Gumshoe makes you feel. It's not like, oh, it's a silly game. It is a very serious game that can have silly, fun high school moments, which I really, really loved about it. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about you mentioned there is combat in the game, but it has real consequences. So a lot of Bubble Gumshoe games tend to steer away from that because you don't want those consequences. But there is a sort of social combat, one might say, with your throw down mechanic. I'm wondering if you could talk about throwing down a little bit, since that's very new, particularly to the Gumshoe system.
Sure. So throwing down is a social combat, like you said. It's intended to represent really dramatic confrontations. There's many times where you might just talk to someone or interact with them, but it's where you, the players, are putting something on the line, where you want to be able to bring someone over to your side, or make a moment of reveal. This isn't you finding the answers. That is governed by the clue economy. But it's a moment where in another game you might be fighting Cthulhu and speaking Latin, or maybe going crazy, or rather, pardon me, having various different types of effects. There's a lot of, I don't want to unpack the social implications of mental illness that are brought into that, but to just talk about the, it's complicated, isn't it?
It is.
And we actually talked about that kind of, the implications of our mechanics are great. We want to take care about what we're representing and how we're representing it, and the things that might seem interesting or fun in one decade are totally inappropriate and offensive in another. So it's important. And I think that we, making social combat be a central thing, have to do that in a world where bullying is not something that can be laughed off. It has real world implications. People are taking it very seriously. And this is intended to represent the way that people can butt up against one another, and do it in a way that's appropriate for the high school milieu, where instead of using knives or guns or magic, you would be speaking and trying to bring people together to support you, or show how people are deceiving somebody else. The teenagers might be going against an adult or another teen, or there's a lot of different ways it can come up throughout. But the throwdown, it's very similar to combat. And at any point you can back off if you want to, but you're making opposed rolls and trying to bring your resources, your friends, your skills, your talents to bear, to be able to get the advantage and bring the situation around to you. So.
Yeah, it's everyone should check out Bubblegum Shoe. It's great fun, as are your other games. One that I really like too is a game called Ma, Can I Help You With That? That appeared in another Pelgrane book. This one was an anthology of games called #Feminism. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about Ma, Can I Help You With That? It's #Feminism is a wonderful product that people should pick up and check out. It's got all kinds of great, amazing game designers in it, and the games range from very light and fluffy to very, very heavy and interesting. So I'm hoping that you could talk to me a little bit about your contribution there.
Sure. I was inspired by a friend who wrote a game. Can I help you with that? Or I'm forgetting the name of Evan Torner's game right this second, but it was, the situation it dealt with was a hostess helping a male passenger on an airplane, and looking at the ways that gender and power differentials place a burden on the caregiver. And the situation that came to my mind that I wanted to represent through games was caregiving an older parent. And so I created a little scenario. They're short games. This one maybe takes 15, 20 minutes to play, where you are caregivers who have an older mother and have different views on what needs to happen and how it can happen. And you only have certain tools that you can do, like that each caregiver can say a lot of things, but when they want to make something happen, they just have sort of a script that they can say and then follow through on that. So in the game, you can tear up those or change them. So for me, it was about looking at the ways that we fall into ingrained roles, often about gender, like who's the person who's supposed to listen and be patient versus blow up and walk away or storm away. and how can we rethink what our roles are? There's a lot of places where we're given a script, and just being able to see it as something that we've been asked to fulfill that role, and see how it affects us, whether it's a healthy place for us to inhabit, whether it's helping the person we're trying to care for, how it might interact with the other people, what pressures are put on them because of it, and seeing if we do change it, what that might shift in the dynamics. So that's sort of where I was coming from for it. And a little too close to home, sure, right? I'm an only child. I'm definitely thinking about this part of my life, being with my parents and caring for them, but it wasn't really informed necessarily by them. So it's one of those things like being a writer. Your family's always like, why are you writing that?
Yeah, absolutely. You have all of these amazing games that you've worked on, that you've contributed to. Some board games we didn't even talk about, Dread House or Monkey Dome. I'm wondering if you could tell me, like, which game or what games, or even other accomplishments. What are you most proud of?
I was thinking about this question you'd let me know you might ask me, and it's hard to say. I think for games, I'm really proud of each of them in different ways. But for me, how it sort of manifests is that there's certain games that they just surprise me. Like, I didn't realize that would work in that way. And for a long time, Shooting the Moon was the game for me that just totally surprised me in terms of what it was. It was more than I expected. And that was because that game ends up having all of these different ways that it can manifest. Breaking the Ice, the structure of it makes it be kind of like a screwball comedy where, things go wrong and there's a happy ending, maybe, but it's usually pretty funny and silly. And the love triangle at the heart of Shooting the Moon ends up being able to give you sometimes quite humorous ups and downs, but often incredible tragedy. You think about Arthurian love stories like Guinevere and Arthur and Lancelot. There's a love triangle there. And one game I played that really still moves me was set in the Siege of Stalingrad, and it was this just like heartbreaking love story. And in the game, people can win or lose, and everyone can lose, so nothing's guaranteed. And right now, the game is surprising me the most is another one that I wrote a little more obscure called Record. You may not have heard of it. All my games are on my website, blackgreengames.com, which I definitely encourage folks to go check it out. There's also like some talks and articles I've written, and also I've tried to put together a lot of resources for other folks who might be interested in thinking about games and narrative and how they fit together. So a lot of fun things to paw around on there. But Misericord I wrote inspired by a friend's game, 1001 Nights by Meguey Baker, Night Sky Games, which is really, really enjoyable game, sort of inspired by the Arabian Nights and storytelling from that. And I plucked a few elements of that game and set them in a far Eastern European country that probably doesn't exist. But for me, it's my go-to game for cons, and it's just really fun and quick and light. The way you create a character is by picking a name and then picking an epithet. So it might be Marjorie the Bald, or there's this returning NPC that has been in many games named Erzabet the Throne Grinder, and that's all you need. And it uses tarot to help you get some ideas to create a situation so you can just start something quickly. And it uses sort of a free-form resolution where people can ask questions to learn more about the world or to see what the outcome might be of an unknown situation. And that game, it really surprised me because it's intended that you just write in the book itself and you mark it up and you add characters and you write a little bit about what stories happen. And then you might do like 2 or 3 stories in a night because they're really short. all of them have the conceit that in this town there are many guilds, and every year at midwinter the guilds get together and they all tell a story about something one of their guild members did, and the guild with the best story is the one that gets the glory for that year. And so all of the guild members have this like alibi to go out and be adventurous, even if they're like from the Butchers Guild or the Weavers. They can all have adventures. And it ended up being just, it really flows well when you're playing at a convention. People like can pick it up very quickly. And also I would use one booklet and write in there. And over time I started having just what I was hoping for with the game, where one story would lead to the next, and past characters would feed into the next ones, and people add their characters to lineages of the guilds with these trees with branches, so they could see what the other guild members were. And it ended up for me creating this rich world that reminded me a little bit, and this is one of my goals, of my friends and their incredible world that they'd created over many years, just hanging out in college when you should be going to class, instead chatting about game worlds. But it was done in this way. It's more supportable for the lifestyle now, older and less free time, but being able to just in these little tidbits of time, a couple of hours with totally different people at different conventions, have them and their world that they created echo forward into other people's. So I guess that's the game I'm most proud of. And just the thing I'm generally most proud of is being able to work with a lot of different communities, and to be part of communities. That's really 100% been what's made it possible for me to do all that I've done, is the communities I've been a part of. And so in each moment where I can help open doors for others, or in any way make it possible for people to connect with resources, being part of Indie Game Developers Network, helping put on conferences like the little Jiffy Con that I did for many years here in my area. That was just let's get together and play, to Living Games Conference, which brought together people from different LARP communities. Those are the things that I'm most proud of, being able to try to do.
Yeah, it is incredible what communities can get done. And speaking of communities, I need to ask you about Timeless, because you are part of the community that watches the television show Timeless, that is calling for Timeless to be saved and brought back. I have never seen an episode of Timeless, so disclaimer, but I've been following on Twitter for a while, and every day my feed blows up with a bunch of Timeless GIFs that I think are almost always from you. So talk to me a little bit about Timeless. What is so amazing about the show? Why do you love it? You're a creator I love and respect, so I want to check out the show because your work is so awesome and you clearly are passionate about it.
Yay, Timeless! Woo! Timeless is a lovely little time travel show. Airs on NBC. It's had 2 seasons, and it's going to have a second season finale on December 20th, 8 o'clock Eastern, 7 Central. So I encourage people to check it out on Hulu. You can see both. You can binge both the seasons and before then, and then watch the finale. What I love about it is that it takes something that we've done a million times, time travel. Wonderful, wonderful genre. And it brought human reality and heart to it. Watching it in 2016, as the election was happening, steamrolling over all of us, it's a show where people traveled to the past and dealt with the difficult issues, or a good number of them. Obviously, there's a lot more that can be delved into, but it dealt with issues of race and class and gender and discrimination in a way that brought people in, that includes you, and put people of color and women of all ethnicities at the center of the narrative, and also just created a really, really fun adventure and had some wonderful romances. So I guess there you go. I love romances. There's a lot of romance in Timeless. So that's one of the reasons I really love it. And for me, it's been this introduction into being part of a fandom And there's different levels of loving something. There's being a fan and admiring it, and then there's delving into it and it really engaging. And then there's being part of a community that loves it. I mean, your community, there are many different role-playing game communities, and you bond with people. So it's really interesting to have this experience of connecting with people over a shared IP, a show on television. And I learned more about fan fiction. I hadn't been too exposed to it before then, and I've started writing fan fiction. And of course, for the first year, I was like, oh my gosh, I should totally write the timeless RPG. Why isn't that out there? And I did a little bit of legwork on that, a little bit, but it's a tough thing to do working with franchises. You have to be in the right position, and it's the little show that could, because it's been canceled twice and brought back twice. So God knows it's not like Buffy or something huge that would, like they'd say, yeah, heck yeah, go do a role-playing game. So I still have thoughts though. And it's lovely. And actually I was just watching an interview that they did some behind the scenes interviews with some of the stars as they were doing the season finale. And Malcolm Barrett, who plays the pilot, who was one of the people that created this time machine, was talking about being able to work with another actor, and they got together on set and they did backstory, and they figured out how Patterson Joseph, his character, mentored Malcolm Barrett's character, and as both African American or African UK men, they had a bond of being able to be people in the STEM field and overcome various different barriers. And they together created this background. And then later they were able to play out that background and talk about that and use that as something they had built together about the characters. So I was like, yeah, they're role playing. Go Malcolm, go Rufus. Yeah, Connor. So it just did my heart good seeing that it's just, there are many different ways to do narrative, and it's a joy to share it with others. And that's what I love about Timeless.
That's awesome. Well, I look forward to Everlasting, the RPG, when you create it. If we need to, go off brand for Timeless because we can't get the rights, we should still do it because it sounds like it'd be amazing. And I'm sure if you were working on it, it would have the passion and the heart required. And I'm definitely going to check out the show. I'm wondering, do you have any advice? Or I'm sorry, let me take that back a little bit. What hopes do you have for the future of the tabletop RPG industry, either for yourself personally or for the industry as a whole?
My hopes are that we continue to look to and support the efforts and work of people who traditionally have been marginalized throughout our world, and particularly in our field. I see that happening every day. The hashtag feminism that you talked about is an incredible consortium of women and women of color who put that together and put their voices out. And that's my hope. I see it happening, and we all have to put our shoulders to the wheel to support that and the efforts of people who are being able to be heard, and that's really important.
Cool. And I am also wondering, what advice do you have for people who want to do what you do?
The top piece of advice is join communities. It can be difficult. Sometimes it's hard to feel like you belong or know how to connect. So try different venues. I had a friend who just had a really hard time connecting, and then they joined a Discord that was dedicated to something that they loved, and immediately they were talking to people who had made works that they loved, and they were able to really feel invested in part of it. For me, hands down, being part of the Forge made it possible for me to not only understand how to do what I'm doing, but also to feel confident enough to try it. Also gave me a tremendous amount of co-creators and collaborators and people who would be willing to try my game. I ended up, inspired by that, creating a small series of local conventions called JiffyCon, where we specifically got together to play games we loved, new games, but also to try them out. It was, playtest go. Yeah, bring your playtest. And people were psyched to play them. And so that's my top piece of advice. Other pieces of advice are follow your vision, because that's what we don't have. Nobody else has your vision. Nobody else has your experiences. And absolutely, that's what we need in the world. And another piece in terms of publishing is choose what your definition of success is. Is it to become fully employed doing game work? Is it to publish something that's going to make someone tear up or laugh? Is it to express yourself? Or is it to whatever it is, whatever your definition is, and hold to that and keep checking to make sure that it's sustainable for your life goals. Your goal can be to make all of your living from. You're not overextending yourself in order to be able to do that, and look to collaborators and friends to learn how and to help you get connected with resources that allow you to do that.
That's awesome. That's really cool. Again, community seems to be a big theme of this, and relationships, which is huge and important. So if people want to follow you, where should they go and what should they do?
Excellent. You can find me at Twitter. My handle is Emily Kerr. And blackgreengames.com is my website. You can find all my games there. Oh, we're having a sale right now. My husband, Epidai Ravachol, also writes games, which is fun. And his birthday is Christmas Eve. And so we have it as Epimus. And he has this wonderful tradition of doing sales on games. And then you buy a game on a discount, and then we send a game to your friend, a friend who might like it on Epimus. And so I'm doing that too. And you can go to my website and get the Romance Trilogy, all of it for $1.99, and a bunch of my other games for 99 cents until the 24th. And I'm also on Facebook, but I think it's all centralized there at my website. So blackgreengames.com will bring you to everything else.
Excellent. That is awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it. It is super awesome to get to finally talk with you. And I want to let people who are watching us know you can follow me at James Introcaso. I'm at twitter.com/James Introcaso. And you can subscribe to this as a podcast over at don'tsplitthepodcastnetwork.com and all the usual places. Search for Tabletop Voices. If you're already listening to the podcast, go ahead and give us a rating. And thank you very much to Will and Sydney for letting this show exist. It's really cool. I love getting to do it every week. And thank you very, very much. You have got to keep watching. There's some amazing stuff coming up next. Frost from Fire's got some really, really cool stuff for you all. Thank you so much. Be very kind to each other.
Thank you so much.